All right. Well, it is 6:03, just past 6:03. I would like to welcome everyone to the AAP California Chapter 2 lecture series. Today's webinar is Moving Away from the Precipice Through Enhanced Professional and Personal Wellness, presented by Dr. Thomas Demaria. This lecture is made possible through the Brave of Heart Fund. Dr. Thomas Demaria is a clinical psychologist who has worked in hospital, corporate, and academic settings during his 35-year career. He has helped develop educational programs related to physician stress management and offered wellness consultations to leadership in major American corporations. Dr. Demaria has delivered over several hundred professional research presentations and co-authored 24 professional publications, including clinical guidance documents on bereavement and disasters for the American Academy of Pediatrics. Dr. Demaria assists Dr. David Schoenfeld with the coordination of Coalition to Support Grieving Students initiative for the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement, and provides consultation to schools dealing with crisis and loss. Dr. Demaria has earned numerous awards for his participation in several hundred local and national community and school crisis responses. During the pandemic, Dr. Demaria provided numerous workshops for frontline healthcare staff, local businesses, and school districts. Dr. Demaria continues to support schools and communities with the support of the Brave of Heart Fund. Please welcome Dr. Thomas Demaria.
Hi, it's an honor to be here presenting, and I'd like to just pause for a second to give some important website information and also contact information. The Coalition to Support Grieving Students can be reached at grievingstudents.org, and there's a wealth of resources to help school staff and other affiliated health professionals, including pediatricians, support grieving students. And the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement is located at schoolcrisiscenter.org. It's based in the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And you can certainly access us through the website. There's emails. You can also send us questions. And you guys should be aware that one of the members of the Coalition to Support Grieving Students is also the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'd like to talk about the concept for this presentation, and it's kind of an interesting kind of premise, but it's something from working with physicians, pediatricians, and other healthcare professionals before and after the pandemic and during the pandemic. I began to see that there are certain things that drive people into what I call the precipice, or burnout, or fatigue, and certainly lead to dissatisfaction. So this presentation is going to focus quickly, because we got a lot to cover, on what are the drivers that push you into this precipice of career dissatisfaction, burnout, et cetera, and how you can prevent it, and how you can start to use this presentation as a way of challenging yourself to kind of pull yourself out of that pathway and figure out what's been pushing you along that route a little bit. So I usually start with the good stuff, but I'm going to start with the tough news. The research, and you guys are certainly probably aware of it, that there's been an increase in stress among physicians, including pediatricians, as a result of the pandemic. But certainly the changes in healthcare have led to a lot more stresses, and a lot of people, who have well-intentioned in their careers as physicians, have fallen prey to substance abuse, mental illness, neglect of their health, family and personal problems, self-destructive behaviors and thoughts, including suicide, thoughts of leaving medicine, and also things affecting directly their practice, negative attitudes and complaints about patients and their families. I always find it disheartening, when I'm talking to a physician or pediatrician on the phone, and they really don't like their patients and don't like the patients' families. You can get a sense that they're in that precipice zone. They've fallen off And that can't make you enjoy your job when you really don't like or care for the people you work with, because that's why you originally got into the field. Um, with people who are in this precipice mode, they get complaints from patients and families, and studies have shown they make more errors medically, and they make problems in judgment too, which is something we'll talk about, how to talk about changing the culture of wherever you work in some way. And that's a big factor. Medical errors can be significantly reduced if physicians are less stressed, burnt out, and feel more included in terms of control of their environment. We'll talk a little bit about that too. And medical compliance drops when the physician is unhappy and the pediatrician is unhappy. The patients don't do what they're supposed to do, and they don't listen because they get a sense that there's a lack of investment. And we'll talk about the emotional component of getting compliance in a little while during this presentation. So the main focus is going to be what's pushing you. If you're in this presentation, you may have a colleague or someone you know who you feel is in that precipice zone or getting close to that burnt out mode. Well, the key factors that we find is low job satisfaction, a poor work climate, poor work life or family work life balance, emotional management problems, and cognitive complacency. In other words, your brain is not working the same way, and we'll talk about that. And also, probably importantly too, there's a lack of a strong wellness plan, and that's really what we'd like to beef up. You use your wellness plan to get through medical school, your residency, start your practice, work in your job, but it's got to be supersized given all the stressors that you guys are facing. So one way to do that is to say, well, does this really apply to me? And a lot of people I talk to, they don't know if they're burnt out. It's kind of an interesting factor that we've so lost conscious and awareness of what we're doing that sometimes we can't identify that we're actually in this category of being burnt out. And one way to do it is to ask a colleague, team member, or your family what they think about the status of your wellness. It's kind of an interesting thing when you say to a colleague, well, do you think I take care of my wellness well enough? And they'll look at you and they'll say, do you really want to know the truth? Well, I see you don't eat lunch. I see you're always rushing about. I see your office is a mess. I see you cursing sometimes to yourself with the door closed. I kind of can hear that sometimes. Again, people pick up on it. We don't hide things as well as we think. You can take a burnout or professional wellness survey. I'll give you those. I'm not going to go through them, but they're in this workshop material, and that content you can access after the presentation. You can also access this presentation if you want to listen to it again. Or you can journal about your thoughts each day and identify strengths, thought traps, or situations where you got stuck, and potential areas of growth. So you don't necessarily need to talk to anybody else, although that's really the best way, but you can do this all in self-study mode if you need to. But the first thing is to hold up that mirror. When you look at yourself, what are you seeing? And it's hard to look at yourself. Certainly when I look at the mirror, I look at this older guy who's staring back at me, and I said, yeah, you are getting old. You don't feel old sometimes, but you are. And the same thing with burnout and being stuck in this kind of mode of not liking your career and not wanting to move on. So this is one of the surveys that's out. And again, I'm not going to go through this because I'll leave that for you guys to look at later. It basically assesses burnout by asking questions, and it gives you the score. If that's meaningful to you, it puts you in sort of a category, whether there's satisfaction or stress seems to be driving your practice. And the other one is more of the classic burnout inventory, the Maslach burnout self-test 2. Maslach is used in industry also, and I've used it in corporate environments to help people understand a little bit about whether their work satisfaction is really driving them or pushing them back a little bit in their lives. And again, I gave you the scoring criteria in terms of understanding those tests. So you'll have that available. But I don't want to get mired down too much in the test questions. I want you to really kind of feel the content, so to speak. And that's really what I'd like to kind of move into right now. So let's talk about the drivers. Remember, the precipice is the place you don't want to end up, but what pushes people? And from talking to physicians and leading stress management workshops for physicians and having physicians as patients, I can tell you that not being appreciated by leadership, your team, patients and their families, is a pretty strong climate driver that really pushes people more and more into that precipice. Lack of alignment of your values around the mission, purpose, and compensation between physicians and their leaders is another driver. Chaotic practice management. The office is not work well, and it's not run, and you really value a strong office manager. And oftentimes, the training and the ability of people to really run a very complicated medical practice is oftentimes lacking, and you feel it. You feel it personally. Being underpaid and overworked. Certainly, salaries have been going down a little bit more and more and more as time goes by, not up and up and up, because costs go up and it seems like compensation gets lower and lower. Time pressure, which is always part of the whole dynamic of compensation in terms of seeing larger volume, being paid less, you have to see more. In fact, physicians tell me they almost have to see sometimes double or triple the patients if they're in a career as long as I have than when they first started. The whole electronic health record compliance, as well as third-party requirements. I hear y'all. I'm not hearing it directly, but I'm hearing people moan as I talk about this in the background. Loss of meaning in work, that sense of accomplishment. At the end of the day, you got something done because there's just so many things you're trying to hold on to. Less control of work schedules and work conditions. Decreased economy in the workplace because you're almost an employee and not a physician, and that can really lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. Even though that might be part of a contractual arrangement, autonomy is something that we're used to work with, especially if you make clinical decisions and rely on your own professional judgment and professionalism. That can be really a hard thing to manage in an environment. And finally is relationship problems with your colleagues, team members, resulting in isolation in the office. I often have had to mediate, believe it or not, in physician practices between two physicians who didn't like each other, but was stuck financially or by the office placement or by the institution they work for put them. It's kind of hard to be in a place and work together to help patients in a place where you don't really like the people you're with. But those are the work environment. Those are the things that are around you. Those are the things a little hard to change a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's really hard to kind of get your teeth into and kind of work around a little bit. What we're really going to focus more on is more what you can do today and you can do tomorrow. And those are the personal drivers, things that you can do today and tomorrow. Changing systems, fixing systems, obviously is more elegant. Obviously is a better way to kind of help everybody. But if you set your sights on that and you don't take care of yourself, what can happen is you'll burn out and you'll never get to that place. So I'm going to start off with, and it's great that you're chiming in because you're obviously people are not doing, endorsing this cognitive complacency. Well, what I mean by cognitive complacency is when you're in a practice and a career, what happens eventually, and you see it, we call it hardening of the attitude, not hardening of the arteries. People begin to resist change, or they demand radical change. They just don't accept anything. They don't think through things. Well, I don't like this. I want it to change. Or I don't want to change. You can't make me. You can't force me. And I'm sure we have those people that we see, and you can see somehow their minds shutting down in terms of flexibility and openness. And what happens is you see that there's a closing of this feedback loop. Every day or every encounter we get to, we're supposed to grow and we're supposed to kind of bend and learn a little bit and try to adapt. But when we get into this complacency mode, we don't want to do that. We become inflexible and rigid. And when I hear people talk in medical practices about being stuck, you oftentimes hear these thought traps. They fortune tell about the future. Well, this is always going to happen. It's never going to stop. Or I know what they're thinking, the mind reading distortions. Or they jump to conclusions. This is the worst possible thing ever. Again, you can tell that they repeat those same things, which show they're really not processing things as scientists, looking for evidence and judging things. And what happens is they resist learning, and there's a cynicism that nothing's going to change. I'm going to be miserable. And sadly, I'm going to make everybody around them miserable. And if you work with these folks, and if you know a little bit of yourself, it's time to try to think about what got you into that place. And especially if you're in the blaming zone and giving orders for other people or the organization you work with or for the children you work with, it gets really hard to get people to change. It's easier again to look at yourself and your attitude. So I'm asking you, and I commend you for being part of this, to give it part of your evening time, is how do you shift your head a little bit about how you perceive things a little bit, and how do you open yourself up again to kind of absorb some of the things I'm going to suggest? Well, one of the things, and we'll always start with feelings, and the work we do working with people requires something called emotional labor. And when you use your emotions a lot, believe it or not, it's fatiguing. In people who get exhausted because they're very compassionate, they're feeling what the other person feels, and they want to help the other person at an emotional level. It's pretty draining. And if you don't manage your emotional labor, you can become depressed and anxious. In other words, you absorb what the patients are feeling in a sense. Or, and I've seen this, the numb healthcare provider or robotic, who's sort of depersonalized, is really there, but not really there. You don't really get a sense of the human in that body. And they kind of go around things in a mechanical, robotic way. And if you don't think patients pick that up, they do. They pick up when you're not fully there. And it's kind of interesting how patients know more about us than we think they do know, especially children. Children are really great perceptors of our own foibles and our own things we're trying to hide inside. So, what is emotional labor? In the helping professions or the healing professions, there are emotional expectations for you. The expectation is you're constantly expected to appear positive during every interaction with patients, caregivers, team members, and organizational leadership. You're not supposed to look sad. You're not supposed to look angry. You're not supposed to look anything but happy and joyous. Even though those work climate issues are around, you're still supposed to be happy. And that's work. They've done studies on greeters in restaurants and in stores, and they look at the greeter stress. The person just says welcome to the store versus the person who has to stock the shelves, real heavy manual labor. And they find at the end of the day, the greeter, who has to be happy when they're not feeling happy, is more tired, more stressed than the person just stocks the shelves. And think about your day. You can't be grumpy doctor. You got to be happy doctor, especially with children. And if the children are upset, the other emotional labor you have to do of supporting emotionally distressed patients or sometimes team members, because they bring in their stuff too, when you're also dealing with your own stuff, is really hard. And I'm sure everybody on the call has had a family member, a friend, or a personal situation that's been very difficult for them. And they have to kind of swallow it, go into work, and listen to other people's problems. To hold that in and to still keep that happy face and that smiling face can be really draining. And it's a job. It's something that will be taxing to us. And realizing that can help us manage it a little bit, because we want to be empathic. And empathy is really about understanding and taking the perspective of another. And we want to be compassionate. We want to help and relieve the suffering of the people we're working with. And if we can do that by listening, or we can do that by imparting medical guidance and advice, we feel fulfilled. And compassionate approaches, however, if not managed, can lead to compassion fatigue because of the emotional labor involved. But compassionate approaches are gratifying and bring meaning to our work. To see a child smile after you've helped them with whatever misery or whatever pain they're suffering from, you had to feel where the child is and know what you had to say to them, or what care you had to deliver, not just giving them a prescription. Again, to do that, it can be draining, and it does take a toll out of us. I've done countless sessions in emergency rooms and the hospital I used to work with staff who were sad because there was an unexpected outcome with somebody who came in, especially involving a child, and they had all the strong emotions and feeling that they couldn't contain anymore. Well, we're not robots. And even though we're clinicians and we're professionals and we have a lot of training to help us deal with very painful situations, if we're compassionate and empathic and not numb and robotic, it's going to build up if we don't keep a check on it and talk to other people about it. We should be careful, though, and this is one of my favorite slides, to not believe that people buy what we're putting out there. Impression management is an attempt to influence the perception of other people about a person, object, or event by regulating, controlling information in a social interaction. I can tell you it doesn't work with kids. I work with kids my whole career, and they know, even before I tell anybody that I'm going on vacation, I'm upset about something, I'm not feeling well. They just know. So despite the fact I want to look like the doctor, they pick it up right away. So as good as you think you are of hiding your stress from your patients and your families, I can tell you, they know, they spot it. And a lot of us think, oh, how can they tell? They just know by a posture, a mannerism, a nonverbal behavior, a choice of language, our focus during our brief encounters with them. They pick it up. So being in tune to your emotions and managing your emotions is a really big important part of this whole process. So one of the drivers too that pushes people to the precipice is stress is part of life. We have stressors that happen to us, and what happens is we try to handle it. We try to put out the fire in whatever way we can. And these are just some of the ones that I've heard across the years from physicians I've worked with that you overuse distraction, and that can include buying things, getting involved in a hobby or like golfing or something. They can overeat, they can abuse alcohol, they can smoke, they can gamble, they can get lost on the internet, they can shop, they can overwatch television. I know we all suffered from that during the pandemic, or they get consumed with social media, they get lost in it. And it's good because all have a sense of taking you off task a little bit, but they're really not relaxing. I for example, will talk to physicians about, well, between patients, what do you do? I grab the next chart. I get it, but do you take 5-minute breaks, 10-minute breaks? Do you do anything? What do you do during your lunch? I surf the internet. Is that really clearing your mind, relaxing, and resetting the clock a little bit and getting rid of some of that stress? And the studies show it really doesn't. It really is not very helpful overusing these habits. So you got to think about other ways and other strategies. So let's get to the tips. You're not here to hear me talk about all the hard things. Just got to give you a little bit aware what might be pushing you. Is you have choices. You can either stop or reduce the stressor, that work climate, which certainly you don't have much control, but you can. Or you can manage your reaction to the stressor, your stress management, your own personal wellness. I would encourage you to try to do both if you can, but really try to focus more attention on managing what you can control, and that's your own stress management, your own wellness, both professionally and personally. So how do you manage personal stressors? Well, I'm going to go back to a diagram you've probably seen a million times, but our bodies respond, whether we like it or not. They respond to stress. We now believe it's the fight, flight, and freeze response to perceived danger. And we know our body gets flooded with stress hormones. And when we're really threatened, it gets to be supersized. And we have other stronger hormones get released in our body, but it changes our bodies in a lot of ways. Whether you're a person who's constantly under stress, I've worked with first responders, police officers, firemen. They have the same stress responses as physicians, as golfers, as teachers. Our bodies are basically programmed to respond to stress. Now, you may become a better stress manager and lower the amount of autonomic arousal you have, and your system may be better controlled, but our bodies respond, and we're humans too, even though we're healers and helpers. And that stress process is going to happen without our awareness. And good stress management can dose it, can lower it, can bring it down if it's too high, and they're attuned to it. But that takes a lot of skill. A lot of us are not aware of when our back begins to feel a little stiff when we're feeling a little stress, or our stomach motility begins to grind a little bit, or our jaw hurts from biting our teeth a little bit, or the fact that when we're under a lot of stress, I always tell my teenagers, when you're under a lot of stress, you get stupid because all that blood doesn't stay in the front of the frontal lobe. It goes all the way back to the hindbrain. And you're thinking with basic animal instincts back at that time. And we forget that. And that's why when you get irritable and cranky and edgy at work, well, maybe that you didn't get a good night's sleep, but it also may be that there's just a lot of stress floating in your system that you're not aware of. So how do you back up a little bit? How do you recognize these signs of stress that are in your body. You can look at them biologically in terms of a chart like this, but you should know your own stress symptoms. How do you know when that stress happens? Is it hyperactivity? Is it demanding it? Is it irritability? Do you take deep breaths? Do you start to get tense? Do you get headaches? Figure out those stress warning signs for you, and that should be a good sign for you to bring that stress down as easy as and quickly as you can. So, and again, I promise I'm going to give you the solutions to all this, but I want to first go what will get in the way. And these are things I've collected, again, from talking to physicians across the years and people in healthcare. Well, the one, if I'll feel better if I work harder. You guys got through medical school, residency, and hell of a lot of work to get where you are today. And you realize that when you had that anxiety about failing, you just worked harder. You kept pushing yourself to make sure you got good grades, to make sure you got through that content, to manage all the stressors of being in clinical practice. You felt that hard work gets you there. But I think with self-care, it's not working harder, it's working smarter. It's a different rubric you got to figure out. Some people believe, and this is one of the myths, that I'll be happy if I can reduce all my stress, and I'm going to do that by avoiding people and situations which cause me stress. Well, you're going to have to find that cabin in the woods, and people are the greatest source of stress, but they're also the greatest source of happiness. And having people in our lives brings joy. So if you isolate in that cabin in the woods and you avoid all people who get you annoyed, you're going to be pretty lonely because no one's perfect. Again, you're not perfect, I'm not perfect, and the world is not perfect. And accepting that can be a big part of the self-care plan. Now, I've been confronted, especially during the pandemic, when people are so frightened about all that was going on, that they would yell, well, how come you're telling me that I have to practice self-care? That's just another burden that I have to bear. Yeah, it is. But by doing self-care, you can bear the other burdens easier. That's why it always should be a priority, believe it or not, because it will make all the other things that you're dealing with just be managed in a much easier way. I can control all the stress I experience in my life. Well, no, because you can't control stress. It's your body's reaction to it. You can kind of control it, but sometimes things can hit you sideways because we're not always aware of what generates our stress. And the other one I'd like to just talk to in a minute is that change is easy. It's not, and we'll go through that a little bit too. These are just another collection of thoughts I've heard. These are quotes from people. The names have been kept away to protect them, but I am invulnerable. I'm a super person. My training as a physician protects me. From being human, from feeling stress? Again, you have to ask yourself that. I do not need a self-care. I'm doing fine. I'll start tomorrow. Self-care is narcissistic, self-indulgent, and selfish. Self-focus is a sign of weakness. I'll feel guilty if I spend time on myself. I do not have enough time to take care of myself. Kind of sad when you really think about it. I should focus on the problems of the moment rather than prevention. I should just keep bailing the boat out rather than fixing the holes in the boat. And I'm good at keeping my work stress and personal family stress separate. How does that work? I always wanted to talk to a person who was able to magically walk into the office and all those worries about your child being sick, your relationship having problems, the sink is overflowing, you're overdoing a car loan. That ends magically when you get in the office. It's there. It's just that work is a good distraction to keep you away from thinking about family stuff. However, let's reverse it. When you work back the other way, does all that work stuff just leave you? Do all that clinical decisions that you're still thinking about, the child that you really don't know what's going on, the confrontation you had with maybe one of the healthcare team members, does all that magically disappear in traffic? What happens to all that? And it doesn't. We carry it with us. And we'll talk about rituals that can be helpful. And I'll explain a little bit more about that to help you realize that you got to do a little bit more than maintaining the illusion that you can maintain that separateness, because they do blend together and merge. Just a brief thing, and I know you've worked with patients who have tons of issues. Getting them to comply is a large part of the battle. And I always, tell people, well, you're given a certain amount of pills for a reason. You don't pick and choose when you want to take them, but people don't like change. Remember, I talked about that cognitive complacency. People don't want to make change. In fact, if you've tried to diet or break a habit, the research is not too good. They say between 70 and 90% of changing of habits fail. So only a rarity, a small number, really get to that place where they succeed. And you wonder, what is it about the human condition that we resist? Well, we like homeostasis. We like things to be the same. And there are stages in the change process. And if you understand that change is something that's an evolving and a process that you have to kind of be flexible to, again, that cognitive flexibility, you can see that you can get to that place. And if you're going to make a change, you have to contemplate what it's about, prepare for it, make the change, but then you got to maintain it because you have to eventually get a relapse. Eventually, there's going to be a mistake. And because you're on a diet and you have a piece of chocolate cake, doesn't mean you eat the whole cake, as they say. You go back to the diet the next day. You don't give up it. And again, understanding that change is a process of adapting, trying, keep trying to make the plan fit better and better for you. And that's really key. If you keep that in mind, that there's no one pathway you're going to follow, it's going to keep evolving. So let's talk about you. This is all. This is if you've been sleeping. I hope you're not dozing. Hopefully, this is not the first chance you've had a break. But I'd like to talk a little bit about some practical things that you can utilize. This is another scale on professional self-care that you can look at. I included it, but what should be your goal? If you're looking at like, okay, Demaria, I get all that you talked about. You gave us all this bad place I could be. What's causing it? Tell me what should I be focusing on? Well, we used to think solely that if you decrease levels of stress, adrenaline levels in your body, the cortisol that's flowing through your bloodstream, entering into your brain, if that's it. Well, but we're also seeing that stress management is just not relaxing, although that's a good portion of it. Relaxation is important. And I hear, for example, a lot of people get, oh, my doctor says I'm very stressed out. He says I should just do relaxation. Well, that's part of it, but there's a lot more we're learning from the research on stress management. We're finding that people who have good wellness plans also dose pleasure in their lives. You need those endorphins in there too. So it's pleasure increase and it's also decreased stress. Those are two big cornerstones of the process. It's not just reducing stress. If you lower all the stress in your life, but your life is boring, you're not going to have a good wellness plan. And it's important to understand that combo is happiness includes both managing stress, not getting rid of it because it's impossible, but also making sure you have pleasure in your life. And this is what I mentioned about cognitive complacency. They've done studies on achieving people who have high life satisfaction, longevity, and they find a compilation of things that these people possess. And characteristics that you can work at is enhancing creativity, flexibility, openness to change and feedback, a problem-solving approach, a positive focus, optimism, hope, gratitude, that positively, goal setting, setting small steps. All those good cognitive skills really work really well to help you manage stress. We also, again, I mentioned before about emotional functioning and regulations. Do you allow yourself to experience your feelings? That's really important. For example, grief, sadness, anger, those are feelings. It's when you hold on to them and you don't process them. The goal is to let the feelings happen, label them, identify them, seeing if they're stuck. And if they're not, just let them go. We're going to get angry every day. We're going to get sad every day. We're going to get anxious every day. That's part of life. Somebody's going to frustrate you. Somebody's going to disappoint you. Somebody's going to get you angry. And that's okay. But you let it go. You let it flow through. You don't hold on to it. A big part of stress management is also body and health wellness. Sleeping. I know that's a hard thing. If you guys have an active family life, social life, in addition to a professional life, sleep is such a big thing, but eating well, eating healthy, exercise, I think we're all kind of aware of that. But the other thing is, and I mentioned before, satisfaction with our relationships, the quality of our relationships. Because if you work really hard and you're tired going home and the people you're with, your partners, whoever you're sharing your life with at that point in time, doesn't support you and the relationship's negative, there's no sanctuary. Home should be that sanctuary that you have, and working to make sure you build positive interactions. Put the time to feed people at home because they're part of your wellness team, whether you like it or not. Whoever you're living with and your group of friends, they're your wellness team. So making sure that you kind of work to improve that. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to make sure there's no barriers in the way of that. These are some domains for professional self-care that the United States Department of Education put together. And what's noteworthy, and it's something for people here who might be faith-based, is that spiritual development is also part of self-care. I thought I'd include that just to have you guys be aware that that can be part of your self-care plan too, although we're not going to focus on during this presentation. So what are your strategies? Well, wellness planning. Well, I've talked to, and you might be a surprise to me. Certainly, let me know. But a lot of people don't have good mentors when they're in medical school residency and clinical practice about how to practice wellness. We don't learn it from anybody. It's not part of our training. I doubt there's a course in your medical school training about how to maintain professional wellness. There may be, and that's wonderful, but oftentimes it's neglected. So it's an on-the-job training, and it's an on-the-job thing. And that's why what you learn to get by the arduous task of getting through your training, establishing practice, developing competencies is wonderful to stress it. But now in a career, it's not the start of the race, it's the middle part of the race where you got to keep maintaining it. You got to keep doing things. And that's where I think if you realize that you didn't get maybe some of the best mentoring because you worked with selfless people who work really hard, and God bless them, they're admirable that they do that, but it's really not a good model for us in terms of our happiness and our longevity. So what are the first steps in terms of developing a self-care plan? Well, accept that you need to improve. First thing is to admit, I'm not 100%, I got to get better, and select one thing. The challenge for you guys is when I present some of the suggestions later, pick one, try it tomorrow, and put it in your schedule. Actually put it in your schedule and tell everybody that this is in your schedule. Between the hours of 12 and 12:30, I'm going to meditate. Between the hours of 1 and 1:15, I'm going to journal. It's going to be in my schedule. Or figure out another way to put it in. And keep it in your schedule. What I do in my schedule, I draw a big red box, and that's my secretary, staff. People can't put it's an important phone call. I can't do it at that time. I have an important thing. It's got to take that level of priority for you. Otherwise, it'll keep getting bumped by there's this emergency, this you have to attend to. And I'm not saying you need to be always rigid. Obviously, if it's a pressing emergency, you have to respond to it. I get it, but it shouldn't be a routine time where people around you can keep putting things in there, including family. They can't. That's your time. When I come home from work, I tell my wife and my family that I have my decompression time, like a diver has a decompression chamber. I need my decompression time. Just give me 15, 20 minutes just to re-enter the home. And we'll talk about transition rituals, but those things are important. And if you do pick something, and as a result of this presentation, you're doing it, reward yourself for doing yourself that, and savor the fact that you're trying to make your life better in terms of wellness. So the pleasure stuff, because of time, I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's something we need to include as part of our stress management plan. We got to get the happiness part of it in, and having a cell phone free night, if that's possible, not watching TV and all the dreaded news that sometimes can bring us down, going out, having date night with people you love, and not talking about work or problems. You need to talk about that too, but having that is really important. But again, this stuff I think is important, but I don't think I need to go over it as much with everybody. Distress management or stress management, meditation, relaxation, massage, yoga, you need to pick one of them. And I'll go through a little bit longer list in a little while. Taking brief breaks. Studies on accidents in the workplace show that if you take a little break, your productivity gets better and your errors get less. If it's work, you tend to get worse and worse and worse in terms of decision making. Focus on your health, exercise, allowing just limited distraction, journaling, sharing with friends, family time, prayer and spirituality and psychotherapy can be helpful. These are just the many different types of relaxation exercises that you can use. Focused breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness, guided imagery, exercise. I know one person who closes their door and dances for 10 minutes by themselves to music with headphones on. Prayer, meditation, hobbies are good ways of relaxing. Yoga, tai chi, warmth, bathing, sunbathing. And some people do self-hypnosis, but including that as part of your daily regimen can help reset that level of stress that you have. And you'll be amazed if you do this at midday for 15, 20 minutes, you'll find your afternoons are a lot better for you. Body wellness, again, take care of your body. Make sure you realize that sleep, you need it, and exercise. And you'll be, and I'm sure you're aware of this because I'm sure you tell your patients, you take care of your body and your mind works a lot better. This is a little bit of the tricky area, boundaries. In order to do this wellness things, you got to acknowledge your limitations and clarify for others that you can't do everything for them. And when boundaries start to get blurry because you get a little needy, you don't really maintain that professional distance with your patients and their families, and you share a little bit too much. You share something during a consultation about your day or what's going on, or somebody in the office. That's not really for them to know, but you can tell that you're starting to not keep that stuff in, and maybe you need to talk to somebody rather than your patients. My favorite thing, and I said I would share this with you, you need to have a transition ritual when you leave work home. And people have done ingenious things. I always get out of my work clothes, my suit and tie, my work gear. I take off, I put a pair of sweatpants on, I take a shower sometimes, but I have some type of way to say I'm no longer at work. I don't keep my work clothes on, or I listen to music, or I jog, or I do something. There's got to be a way you demarcate that you're no longer at work. You can't be Dr. Tom. It's Tom when I'm home. It's a whole different zone. And if you don't set that boundary, remember you always have that stuff in your back of your head, you never stop working. And I know during the pandemic, when a lot of people work from home, you realize you never escape work because home was work. And I think that's not so good. And the same thing too with work. When you're at work, the stuff from home is important. And certainly if there's an emergency, people can get a hold of you, but you can leave times during the day where you will be able to take calls and things like that too. So you can focus your attention, and problems you're having at home or in a relationship just don't get intermingled with everything else you're doing. And part of that, though, is being available when you get home. I find a lot of physicians who get calls at work oftentimes don't allow time for their family at home. They get home and they want to just vegetate someplace and avoid people, and they don't feed their relationships and their family. You got to figure out a way to do that too. By the way, you also need to have a leaving the house ritual. You kiss your partner, wife, husband goodbye. You do something to show that you're leaving the house too. It's a good way of demarcating that now you're in the transition mode to go to work. Again, try it. You'll be amazed at how much it helps you keep everything and keep those boundaries sort of intact for yourself. Stress and conflict management go hand in hand. And this is a quick. What I've learned both at a corporate level, I've learned in medical practices, I've learned with working with teenagers. This is my one size fits all, and certainly feel free to adapt it. But one thing that's really important in terms of is interpersonal effectiveness, and there's lots written about it. But I find that what's the key to it is this active listening. People say, well, what do you do as a psychologist? What are your skills? Well, I always start by tell me what's bothering you. It's this listening thing. And you know, good pediatricians are masters at this in terms of listening to really what's being said without trying to think about your comeback. And I think if we're rushed, sometimes our listening skills are not so good. And I think that's really the start of it. And there's nothing that makes people feel good if they're angry at you when you summarize and restate. What I hear you say is the following. Is that correct? Okay, I understand that that's important, and I'm glad you share that with me. It disarms people right away. And again, I've been in situations with potential violence. It just helps de-escalate a little bit. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need more forceful strategies, but it really can be very helpful. And I usually share, listen, I'd like to improve the way I communicate with you, and I appreciate your feedback. Here's where I'm coming from. I was once in a hospital, and a person there was threatening a nurse with a knife. And I came and pointed the knife at me. And I said, well, I see the knife's doing a lot of talking here, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. Could you tell me what's going on? And I'd really like to hear, because I apparently you're upset and something's bothering you. Could you give me some feedback and tell me what you are? And can I also say that you're scaring everybody here with the knife? I promise we'll listen, and we'll try to get a sense of what you need, but just put the knife down. It'll make my ears work a lot better if you can do that. and it disarmed them. And it's a skill set that I keep having to practice too. And my biggest skill is sometimes I try to think ahead and don't listen well. And I find when an interpersonal interaction doesn't work well, that can be often the cause of it. The language of conflict resolution is, when you said that to me, I felt sad because I care about you. I'd like you to try to ask or tell me feedback in another way. Those are the stems for conflict resolution. I'm sorry for flying by this, but I want to make sure I get the content out to you. And sometimes you need to take a step back. And I know sometimes that people get hot in a situation and it keeps escalating. You got to know when to take a step away. And I have some examples, and you can read them later, about calming thoughts, how to just back away and get out of the buzzsaw. Just don't get into it and calm yourself down. And these are just some additional wellness tips. Again, feed your support system. Again, they're there for you, both your home support system and your work support system. Everybody on your team supports you in one way or another because you help create a better work climate. And one of my favorites, I was just in a physician's office and I looked at their office. It didn't look exactly like this, but it looked kind of like this. And clutter is not just stuff that we want to read, those journal articles we keep. It's emotional clutter. It's relationships we keep that are really not helpful. It's habits that we keep, which are really not helpful. We tend to hold on to things when we want to feel safe. We want to feel a sense of control, but all they do is they get in the way of our happiness, to be honest, and they can block what we want to feel. So if you can reduce the clutter in your life, get rid of the things that really don't really matter to you, and simplify your life more. This goes back to Henry David Thoreau and the existentialist back in the day, transcendentalists, I'm sorry. If you can simplify your life, it really makes a big difference. So think about what's cluttering your life, what's going to get in the way of your wellness plans, and that's really important. Pacing yourself, really important. Put everything on your schedule. We live by schedules, but you got to prioritize, like, what do I really want to accomplish today on a personal level or professional level? What's the target today? And if I get that one thing done, that's pretty good. I keep a notebook and I list my targets for the day, and I check off whether I got there at the end of the day. If not, I add them to the following day. But I keep it simple, no more than 2 or 3 targets for the day. And then I say, did I get there? And then I say, yeah, I got it. I think I had a good day. I got to my targets. I got to what I wanted to do. And it's not necessarily seeing a certain patient volume or reading certain journal articles or publishing a paper. Those can be, but if you break it up into small, manageable bits, it increases our satisfaction and happiness with ourselves. Laughter, there's nothing can de-stress a situation than laughter. And I always try to look for opportunities to practice. Sometimes my jokes and my delivery are not as good, but it gives you that perspective, especially if it's humor that's joyful and not necessarily humor that's picking on somebody or hurtful. And I sometimes get some of my jokes by watching a comedy show, or in one workplace, we had a joke telling session. Everybody had to bring in a joke, and we would tell jokes every so often. It just shifts you away from that serious mood, and it just helps you reframe things and helps you really gain perspective greatly. Forgiveness, I know I work with a lot of physicians who are pretty angry at sometimes the organization, the work climate, the office manager, other physicians in the practice, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It really just gets you an ulcer or a headache or a heart attack someday if you hold that anger in. So I just say that people are usually not at their best when they're under stress and they say things. I just have to let it slide by. It's not worth holding on to it. And if I'm angry, okay, I'm not going to deny that I'm angry. Somebody said, well, you're angry at me? Yeah, but it's gone. I realize that you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. The world's not perfect. I'm just going to let it go. So forgiveness is a big part of that wellness plan too. I don't want to not talk about changing the workplace. I don't want to get a sense that you need to just stay in a situation where you might feel victimized. But, and certainly the AMA and the American Academy of Pediatrics have wonderful publications on helping you start to develop more of those workplace climate factors that really lead to dissatisfaction, problems in medical practice. But they're hard, and you have to tolerate and accept that you can't change them immediately, but you can work toward that goal. And you can share your thoughts with leadership, especially about how it will improve medical practice, medical care. And obviously, if it's a profit-driven organization, profits too, because you'll have less mistakes and more efficiency. But one way you can change the workplace is for you to become a wellness champion. You become the model. You're a person who shares their wellness activities, and you'll be amazed that that one positive voice can turn practices around. If you're happy, you're smiling, and you brag about the wellness activities you're doing, not the things you've done. It's just how you focus on wellness as a real priority for yourself. It can really change the workplace. It's amazing how one person can really work wonders to shift things around. So putting your personal wellness as a priority should be what you're trying to do. You don't want to be in the precipice. You also don't want to be in a place where other people are all first, and you're a great pediatrician, but at the end of the day, you're unhappy and you want to leave medicine. You're dealing with emotional issues, or you're using a lot of things and habits to get rid of the stress that's built up in you that are really not very effective. So I mentioned before, this is the quick commercial that www.grievingstudents.org is a wonderful organization that's part of the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement, and lots of wonderful material to help people working with children help children grieve and understand grief, how to approach children, what to do in special situations. For example, there's talks on developmental and cultural issues in grieving, practical considerations, reactions, and triggers at children and how to support them. And certainly as pediatricians and as leaders in terms of the lives of children, you can certainly share this with schools and school professionals and working with the children you care for, that it can be a meaningful way for the child to really get that support. One that's really hard for people to deal with, and that's, for example, death by suicide. And in the crisis and other special circumstances section, there's both videos, handouts, all free. You can help both your practice sometimes manage when there's a death by suicide of sometimes a family member, of a staff member, or it could be someone a staff member knows, it could be a child or a sibling of a child that's in your practice, or somebody in a school district that you work with. Again, there's great resources that you can give to them and share. And there's also a free book that can be downloaded. It's for parents to how to help their children support their children during the grieving process. Again, this is all for free, and you can access to the grievingstudents.org. And the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement, we respond all around the country to crisis and disasters, and we consult with a lot of major school districts. We're working currently with the New York City Department of Education, Los Angeles Unified School District. We've worked with Broward County. We're there after the shooting in Parkland. We're in Washington, D.C. right now, working with both the charter schools and the public school systems. And we've been involved wherever there's a tragedy. We're there. Dr. Schoenfeld David was in Hawaii after the wildfires. He's been in Sonoma after their fires. It seems like whenever there's something going on, we're there to help support schools, pediatricians, to help support children. So please, if you have anything that you'd like to share or ask of us, these are the resources. Again, the website is www.schoolcrisiscenter.org, and please give us a shout out. So, are there any questions that came up? I know I talked a mile a minute. I'm a New Yorker. That's where I'm calling from. But is there anything that came up in the chat room that I can address that help clarify some of the things that were brought up tonight?
I do not see any questions in the chat. Everyone is welcome to unmute their microphones if you would like to ask something, or you can directly put it in the chat if you would like. I want to thank you, Dr. Demaria, because I feel that this has been a therapeutic session of mindfulness, self-awareness, and self-assessment. And it's refreshing, and it provides very good guidance for our everyday work. These are topics that we often hear from time to time because it has become a very popular topic, unfortunately, because a lot of us are stressed out, overstressed, and overworked. And in every conference there is something similar, and it's given to us with different perspectives. and your presentation was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to unmute your phone if you have a question. Okay. If we don't have any questions, anything else that you would like to add, Dr. Demaria?
No, I just want you to take the challenge of pick one thing that you heard today before you forget it and try it tomorrow. If you can do that one thing, that would be awesome. And it also will help you put a bookmark into maybe doing another thing the next day. So try to make yourself a priority and pick one thing that you heard today to add to your wellness plan.
Thank you very much. We will
Thank you.
make this presentation available to everyone who participated. It will also be sent to everyone who registered. And please look in your email for those details and also with a post-event evaluation. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good night.